Welcome to our Expert Series, brought to you by Xponents. I'm Deb Siverson, and I'm honored today to welcome Dr. Laura Belsten. Laura's got a PhD in Leadership and Organizational Communication from the University of Denver, and she's a Master Certified Coach through the International Coach Federation. Laura's also the Executive Director of the Institute for Social and Emotional Intelligence and the developer of the most comprehensive, fully validated, and statistically reliable social and emotional intelligence assessment instrument on the market today. Thank you for joining us this morning, Laura.
Thank you, Deb, so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So one of the things that I really am excited to hear from you today is what drew you to do this work around social and emotional intelligence?
Oh, that's a great question. When I started coaching executives about 17 years ago, I learned very quickly that some of them really needed help with social and emotional intelligence. They were very good at what they did, either technically or financially. They were brilliant, some of them off the charts of brilliant. And yet they lacked people skills. They weren't aware of the impact that they were having on the people around them. And as a result, their workplace became a revolving door with really good people leaving, and they would be constantly having to replace these good people. Others stayed, at least physically, but not mentally. So some people stayed, they just kind of checked out. But the workplaces often became toxic. And what drew me to this work is I wanted to help them find a way to help these executives step up their leadership skills and their approach to ensure that the people that they worked so hard to recruit and train would not only stay, but also be productive and happy in their work, engaged.
I'm curious, how long ago did you start developing the research or collecting the data points?
Well, it did start way back then. It was in the late 90s and early 2000s when we really began taking a close look at the research and all the different assessment instruments that are on the market. We took a look at all of them and took a look at what they were measuring and what they were not measuring. And there are definitely similarities across the board. And then there were some things that were slightly different. And we created that instrument, the SEIP, the Social and Emotional Intelligence Profile, to close the gaps, which is, I appreciate your mentioning that. It's the most comprehensive. We're very proud of that. We feel that it is the most comprehensive assessment instrument on the market today. We took a look at what everybody was doing and closed the gaps that we saw.
So how long has this instrument been on the market?
It's been on the market about 10 years now. It was about 3 or 4 years in development, has been on the market 10 years. We started the Institute. As I mentioned, I developed this instrument for my own coaching practice originally, but other coaches really wanted to learn how to use it. They wanted to use it, and so we moved the assessment instrument and all the related materials, all the tools, development tools and tip sheets and worksheets and exercises out of my coaching practice and into the Institute in 2010, and really started training coaches around the world. We've got coaches now in all around the globe who are certified to use the instrument and do this kind of coaching. It's a real specialized niche of coaching.
As you know, Laura, I'm really personally interested in the link between employee engagement and socially and emotionally intelligent leaders. What does your research suggest about that link?
Great question, and I just applaud you for the work that you're doing in this arena. So first, perhaps we should identify what we mean by socially and emotionally intelligent leaders. And what we mean there is that we love that 4-quadrant model where we have people who are self-aware. They're aware of what's coming up for them in the moment. They understand when they're getting upset or when they're feeling passionate or feeling burned out. They're aware. And then they're also aware of others. So the second quadrant is other awareness. They're aware of what others might be experiencing. And they use that information, and it's a very rich source of information if we listen to it, to then manage their responses. So the third quadrant is self-management, and the fourth quadrant is relationship management. So they manage themselves, and they manage their relationships with others. And it's really relationship management that makes the world go round, particularly in business. So that's what we're looking at in terms of socially and emotionally intelligent leaders. And then we should probably define what we mean by employee engagement, because it's not employee satisfaction. Employee satisfaction is passive. People might show up, they might be fairly satisfied with their work, but they're not putting in the discretionary effort. Employee engagement really involves a commitment on the part of the employee to the work and to the employer. There's an emotional component to it, a drive, a passion to go the extra mile, to use that additional discretionary effort to really help the organization achieve success. So with those things defined, you had asked about the link and the research. It's really the Gallup organization who was the first to really begin thoroughly researching this topic of employee engagement about 20 years ago, starting about 20 years ago. And they have identified three different kinds of workers. They are workers who are actively engaged, they are disengaged, and they are actively disengaged. So about 30% of the U.S. population is engaged. These are people who are really deeply committed to the success of the organization and emotionally connected to the organization's mission and goals. They routinely put forth discretionary effort. About 52%, this is huge, are disengaged. They're just not emotionally connected to their work. They don't put forth the extra effort. They show up, but they pretty much just do the minimum. And then you've got the actively disengaged, which is about 18%. And they actually work actively to sabotage. They work against the organization. They work against the boss. They poison the climate and the culture. And so one way of looking at this is to think about a crew team. Let's say you've got a crew team that are 10 people out there crewing on the river. 3 of them are rowing their hearts out. That's the 30%. 5 are just kind of sitting there taking in the scenery, and 2 are actively trying to sink the boat. And this is costing businesses, United States businesses, somewhere between $450 and $550 billion a year. It's a real serious problem. And the most important component that makes people feel engaged in their work, as it turns out, according to the research, is the leader, the person's direct supervisor, manager, the executive, the leader in the organization. People join organizations, but they leave bosses. And they leave either physically or just mentally check out. But it really comes down to the quality of the leader. And it's what we're finding is that those leaders who are score high in social and emotional intelligence have far more engaged employees. So that's a little bit of the research.
It's a interesting. I know it's such a fascinating topic when you start looking at some of the latest research on employee engagement. Another one of my favorites is Blessing White, and they also link emotional intelligence, or I should say, employee engagement and emotional intelligence, in terms of the individual. So there's like the two sides, the leader, and then the individual. And how connected and aligned the individual is to their own, values, vision, what I call values, vision, purpose, and mission at work. And so there's a part of that individual knowing themselves, but more and more they're saying too, it's how the leader helps the individual align what they bring to the table with the organization.
Yes.
And that's a
Very true.
That's a little complex, right?
It is. It takes a really good, and leadership is complex.
Mm-hmm.
And it really takes very good leaders. I mean, we are seeing that, there are a number of things that leaders really need to do. Number one, they need to set very clear expectations. Some of the research suggests that only half of the people surveyed are really clear on what's expected of them. And when they don't have clear expectations from the leader, and the leader doesn't draw the connection between their role and what they're contributing to the overall whole, people get really frustrated. Mm-hmm. It just causes enormous frustration. Leaders also need to give people what they need to do the job. If employees don't have the support or the knowledge from the leader to do their jobs effectively, they kind of come to the conclusion that the organization is not paying attention to them. Mm-hmm. And if they begin to feel that their work is not important or they're not personally valued, they kind of head down that slippery slope of disengagement. Mm-hmm. Another thing that leaders need to do is they need to be extremely generous in praise and recognition, in acknowledging and appreciating the individuals who work with them. I mean, one of a human being's greatest needs is to feel appreciated and valued. And a great many people in leadership roles just don't understand how essential this is to employees and how recognition can lift an employee's spirits. So it is complex. But there's a direct correlation in the research. There's a case, Amadori, where they're an Italian food supplier. And they found that there was a direct correlation. The higher, and we can measure EQ, emotional intelligence, the higher the EQ of the managers, the higher the employee engagement scores. So we can measure both employee engagement and we can do a 360 multi-rater feedback and find out where a leader's strengths are and where their development needs are in terms of boosting their emotional intelligence. And those people who score more highly have much more engaged employees. There's a direct correlation. We've seen that at IBM as well. They did 360 assessments at the beginning of an engagement. They measured employee engagement. They brought in training and coaching programs to help the leaders boost their social and emotional intelligence, redid the assessments about 12 months later, and employee engagement went up significantly, and in a direct track with the social and emotional intelligence of the leaders. It's just incredible.
It's interesting. I love that that statistic or that case study, I'm finding myself curious. I don't know if you heard about another one that was presented by Dr. I think it's Ghini. He's also from Italy. Last year at Harvard, they said that he, for the first time, has research that shows that link, direct correlation between the level of emotional intelligence in the leader and productivity and basically, output revenue generation, which makes it a clear link to performance, which is exciting.
Yes, a clear link to performance, to productivity, and which leads to profitability. There is a bottom line direct correlation to this. And the interesting thing is there was some research also recently that suggested, I think they interviewed 1,000 employees, American, in the United States, and 65% of them said they would prefer a new boss over a pay raise. How sad is that?
That
yeah.
That's really surprising, isn't it? In many.
It is, yeah.
So we know.
So really, go ahead.
I was going to say, we know that there's this really, meaningful impact on bottom line, on employee engagement, when we have emotionally and socially intelligent leaders in the workplace. It's costing us a bundle not to ensure that basic premise is met at work. And I'm just wondering, I mean, how do we go about it? I mean, if you could give the best possible advice to folks in the organizations or in the human resources group or leaders on the line, I mean, what would you say?
Oh, that's a great question, Deb. Great question. Number one, I would say they need to develop their leaders. The research shows that leaders who take an interest in their employees, who care enough about them to support them in their growth and development, people come to work wanting to do a good job. They start out in a new position really wanting to make a contribution. And it's the direct day-to-day contact with their leader that makes all the difference. So it really starts with developing the leaders. And we've all heard that old adage that what gets measured gets done. So they should start out by measuring employee engagement at every level of the organization and getting a sense of where are we on that. And then they should measure every leader's social and emotional intelligence using a 360 assessment. And that way the leader knows what their strengths are, but they also know what they need to work on developing. And then organizations can bring a training program into the organization to introduce the concepts to the leaders of employee engagement and the link with social and emotional intelligence, the connection between the two. And in that training, they can help leaders identify their strengths, their social and emotional intelligence strengths. We always want them to be mindful of their strengths, and also help them identify their development needs. And then pair them with a coach, an executive coach, who will support them in the social and emotional intelligence skills or competencies that they most need to develop. This is actually a very effective use of limited training and coaching and development dollars, because we can pinpoint exactly those areas of development that are most needed. And with coaching, you have constant reinforcement of skill development. This doesn't happen overnight. People are the way they are because of a lifetime of being who they are. And again, we're not trying to change personalities here. We're talking about behavior change, helping people identify what they're feeling, experiencing in the moment, what others might be being more aware of what others might be experiencing, so that they can choose a better response. We're not talking about changing personalities. We're talking about changing behavior. Behavior is a choice. And ongoing support of a coach helps reinforce those behavior changes and also ensures accountability. So one of the most effective things an organization can do is provide an executive coach and then remeasure. Make it part of the values and the workplace guidelines. Make it something that is measured in annual performance reviews, annual performance appraisals, and let people know that this is one of the things that the organization values very highly in its leadership, and that the expectation is leaders are going to develop these skills and improve employee engagement.
One of the thoughts that's striking me right now is the ideal absolutely is, having an executive coach to really help support that inner work that has to happen in terms of how one behaves and changing their approach to leading. What about at that mid-level manager position, where so often in organizations there aren't necessarily resources allocated for an executive coach? Have you found any good solutions for, I'm going to say, the mid-level or the frontline supervisor once they've identified where they have an opportunity to improve their effectiveness, and without the resources of an executive coach. What have you seen that's worked there?
That's a great question, and there are actually a few things that can be done. Number one, in addition to bringing in training to the senior-most leaders and coaching on both social and emotional intelligence and on employee engagement, and giving them a coach, we can teach them to become coaches, to take a coach approach to leadership. And in fact, there's a direct correlation between leaders who take a coach approach to developing their people. So rather than have a direct correlation between those individuals who take a coach approach to leadership and social and emotional intelligence. So leaders can kind of become developers of the next level down and help them develop social and emotional intelligence skills in their management. That's number one. Number two, executive coaches can also bring in what we call group coaching. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like mini training programs, only it's really more about coaching and in smaller groups. So having the coach work with 5 or 6 or 7 people at a time on a regular basis, coming into the organization for an hour or 90 minutes, once every other week or once a month, to work with smaller groups of people. It's much more cost effective. And what we find is that those individuals who are part of a group develop a camaraderie and a good support system for each other. So on a day-to-day basis, they become close friends, and they support each other. If they're struggling with something, in between the group coaching sessions, they always have someone they can go to. That's internally. Great. One of the other things about this research is one of the things that makes people feel engaged is the strong emotional connection of having a good friend in the workplace, someone you know you can trust and go to. And the group coaching fosters that kind of connection, and people support each other. By the way, it has some other spin-off benefits. It increases communication across the organization. It increases cooperation and collaboration across the organization. People like to get to know one another, and they support each other more when they know each other. Yeah. So that's 2 ways that we can bring this into, drive this down into the organization to the mid-level and lower level.
That's amazing. I think advice for organizations that are trying to figure out how to make their resource dollars count. So developing what I call leaders as coaches, and then this whole notion of group coaching and creating communities of practice is a really powerful way to move the organization forward. Well,
and communities of best practice.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Communities of best practice. Well, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time this morning to join me and to share some of the learnings that you've had and the great work that you're doing. And I really also want to thank you for that work. I really value and honor those that are out really wanting to make the workplace a better place for all of us to be. I mean, the impact is, we sometimes think about it as being employee engagement, but it's also what we receive and experience out there in the world, because people that are more engaged are going to co-create with us in a different way too when they're serving us, when they're watching our kids, in daycare centers and
exactly.
It has a very far-reaching effect.
It really does, Deb. And I mean, we spend so many waking hours at work, so much of our lives, 5 days a week, 8 hours or more of every day, 50 weeks out of the year. We might as well make it a pleasant experience.
Yeah,
and a meaningful experience.
Absolutely. Well, Laura,
So thank you.
Thank you again. All right.
And thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. And I just want to acknowledge you for the good work you do. I don't know if your audience knows what an incredible coach you are to a great many people around the globe. And I really appreciate this opportunity to spend a little time with you, Deb. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that.